Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Something to Drink On. I am your host, No Crook, and today I have with me a friend of mine, as usual, Jeshua. He is an old roommate from college, and he is very kind to supply us with our drink of choice today, chocolate milk. I was excited when you texted that to me. I was like, yeah, I get to feel like a little kid at 9 a.m. in the morning.
Well, the only way to do chocolate milk correctly is to actually use the syrup yourself. You can't go to the store and get that chocolate milk. That's not the same.
Yes.
It's a terrible version.
It's a mockery of chocolate milk.
Blasphemous.
Just like Yoo-hoo. Except that's chocolate soda, but it's still a mockery of chocolate milk in my opinion.
Yoo-hoo doesn't expire though.
That is true. Yoo-hoo doesn't expire. Alright, well, one of the things that Jeshua and I had in common is in our undergrad studies, religion, Bible, theology, kind of our niche, you know. And one of my favorite things that he's kind of developed over the years of knowing him was the idea of the church that doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, it's I would phrase it as a church that gives a shit. Purely out of the effect of I don't want people to think I'm the only one, and I also want to make sure that everybody knows that I care about them,
yeah.
But I also do not care about any of the preconceived notions of what I should be.
Of what church is. Right, absolutely.
So that's what the intent there is, right? Is to say, hey, you hate going to church. Well, that's okay, because I hate going to church too.
That's why it's only an online service. No, although I'm absolutely sure if this were to happen, you would do that.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it actually makes up. Still,
yeah,
actually doing it wise,
right,
is difficult when you have college debt.
And life. And the house.
Having to maintain a job to pay it off because unlike all of your friends who decided to not get good jobs, your student loans kicked up to the maximum.
That's true.
And forced me to pay them all off in 10 years.
Yeah, that's true.
I had no leeway to make them cheaper. So now I'm just locked in.
Yeah. So Jeshua here actually does have a good paying job. If you want to go into kind of like what you do.
I make programs to test programs.
Yes, so he is a programmer and obviously makes a good amount of money doing that. One of my few friends who's not married who has a house. So that's actually pretty pimp with his adorable cat Scarlet. So
yeah. Which
I can respect because my two cats at home, I understand the cat dad life. It's interesting.
It's the best.
It is actually kind of nice. I always wanted dogs when I was living by myself, but man, I'd feel so much guiltier leaving my dog at home as much as I do as my cats. Like, I'll be honest, I feel guilty enough that I leave these things that have kept me alive at home by themselves. If it was a dog, I wouldn't leave my house. It'd be terrible.
Well, the thing is that Scarlett's gonna sleep 16 hours a day. No matter what. So if I'm gone for 8 of those hours, she doesn't care.
That's fair. That's how Missy is. Tux is more of a I want attention cat. But he also plays fetch and acts more like a dog most days. So that's where that comes from.
That's fair.
But going back to the church idea. So given your position, obviously, like you said, not going to happen anytime super soon.
Yeah.
But this idea of a church, this idea of a community that is still focused on God, trying to figure out who God is, and what that means even outside of the context of Christianity, which I know you kind of mentioned that to me. Talk about that for a little bit.
Outside of the context of Christianity. So the intent is, so I continue to encounter people who, as a result, I went to school with a ton of people who, did school to go and teach church.
Right.
None of them like going to church now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's... No, I actually don't think there's anybody who was with us in undergrad that...
The only person I can think of is...
Blake.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and even then,
And he really likes his gig right now.
Yeah.
But, I mean... he even... Like, he's even doing something different than
he intended.
He intended.
Yeah.
So,
which, I mean, that's not necessarily out of...
No.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, I think he's the only person off the top of my head in our cohort. There may be some other people who we weren't really close to that might.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely some people that went on to go do a church.
Yeah.
But, like...
Or churches.
Yeah, but I don't think that they... if they enjoy it, then they're not like me at all, and I'm so happy that they're enjoying it.
Yes. No, I get that. Because...
But I do not... And so here we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like one of the problems is after you become disenfranchised with the whole idea of the church, which is really easy to do because
the church
of how it's set up, is to use your emotions to help keep you there so that you continue paying money. Like, this is all normal.
Or, like Nate and I were talking about, where it has this odd capitalistic perspective on the other side, like when you're a leader.
It has a capitalistic perspective with the worst capitalistic business plan to ever exist. It says, hey, if we sit 1,000 people in church seats and then convince them that the building fund matters, then we can afford to run this business. That's a terrible business model. You should be, like, selling t-shirts, man.
Honestly, I'm surprised more churches don't sell, like, t-shirts or gear.
If you were doing that, you could, like, give something back for the money that's being exchanged. Like, the only worst business plan I've heard of is student loans, where you don't even know if they'll make money later. But
that's just predatory almost at that point.
Yeah. So like we're just sitting here with a model that says I am a pastor who is getting paid by keeping people in seats, and therefore I have to say things that won't make them leave their seats. But then I went to school because I had a conviction to do something different than what I was currently doing, and now I'm stuck in an endless cycle of, well, I get paid to do this though, so now I have to people please enough to make it by. Sure, people might like feeling shame to some extent, to where you can get away with sharing things that aren't. Don't worry about it, man. Those lids are trash.
Sorry, anyway.
So we're, dang it.
You're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, my thought process died.
Talking about a person wanting to do something different, going to school.
Oh yeah, they want to do something different, but then they get stuck in this loop of not getting to do anything different because the churches that want to hire them have the same old people as they left with. And so now they're stuck in the same cycle of doing the same things. And even if the place is okay with something like a feeling shame for the bad things that they've done, which allows you to do a little bit more, like talk about more difficult topics, it's still not an overly positive experience.
Right.
Because in the end, what I believe what religion is supposed to be, if I boil it down, is the ability to ask questions about something that you don't know.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And that
find
right
some sort
there.
of answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not even necessarily the right answer, but find some sort of answer.
Yeah, because in the end, if something is as mystical and magical and worth its salt as everybody has expounded it to be, then your searching for it should be okay.
Absolutely.
And no aspect of that should be frowned upon or anything. And so, like, it's just so difficult for me to even go to a church and still doing all of these things because it hurts.
Right. Sorry. The creaking is the leather couch that we're on right now. So not only does my friend have a nice job, a house, and a nice leather couch, he also has probably every game system I could ever want in my life, and that is...
That's true.
Yeah, it's interesting. But we keep getting sidetracked. That's my favorite
fine.
part about this podcast. I actually had a friend of mine, I asked him to give some criticism. He was like, it's a little too sporadic. Like, I felt like I couldn't follow you sometimes. I was like, yeah, it's chaotic. That's literally me in a conversation. Hi. I've known you for like 3 years now. You should get used to this.
It done messed up going to listen to it.
Yeah, he was like, well, I'm used to podcasts or something being more like focused. I was like, well, maybe if they're trying to be informational, yeah. This isn't informational. This is a fun conversation that hopefully people take something away with,
Yeah.
And I think that's been the funniest part. Is originally I was like, hey, I want to do this podcast. I don't want to make it just about religion. I talked to Nate, Alex, and you back to back, and I'm like, well, I guess we're going to be talking about religion.
Well, you went to everybody who got degrees for that and didn't get to do it. The only time that they get to use their degree is when talking to people.
Yeah. The funny thing is, though, out of the three of you, and I'll probably, I've posted Alex's before I do this one. He is probably the most positive towards the church. Outwardly.
Yeah.
Inwardly, he definitely has some stuff, which we talked about. But it's funny that Nate and I share some of our piss and vinegar that we have, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
It's not so much piss and vinegar. It's more just like, I want something better. This could taste better.
It's not that I have personally been destroyed by it.
Right.
Because I saw everyone being destroyed by it. And then my best friend back in Missouri,
oh God, yeah, that's right.
He was getting destroyed by it. And I was like, hey, maybe there's something bad here. Maybe I should like not do some of it. it might not be good for me because people with similar views to me are losing.
Yes.
And so losing's a bad word for it.
No, I think it's accurate though, because I mean, really, what it comes down to is we all had a hopeful idea of the church being better, and when the church doesn't want to change, we lose.
Yeah.
We lose that fight.
Yeah.
And so I think that's an accurate word.
But I think that the problem is that everybody who I could relate to in those regards, they aren't going to go to church anymore because they've made a similar decision that I did, where it's more harmful for me to often show up to those things. And it's not even just that, like, I can't get behind most of the sermons that I listen to, and and it's not even that I think that they're all around bad. It's that if I sat and listened to them and then internalized them at all, I would enter similar destructive tendencies that I have already been through in my past. Like, it's... I'm trying to think of a good example right off the top of my head. Like, a really good one is that really early on I started listening to worship songs, right? What they're about. What am I listening to? I just kept on hearing myself reflected back in them, rather than songs that were about this divine thing that we were supposedly worshiping.
Right.
I think that over time my view of worship has continued to decline for other reasons, mainly out of like, why?
Isn't that life already? Why do we have to
add
this extra step for some reason?
Why is singing all of a sudden the preordained way that we connect with divinity?
Absolutely.
Like,
absolutely.
How you connect with divinity is by existing on this earth. Like, one of the things that Richard Rohr has in his books is that in the end, God is in all of creation. God is the redeeming force in all of creation.
Right.
And so, like, being out in nature, the reason why it has any euphoric feelings is because, like, in the end, you're connecting with divinity. Even if, like, it's not exactly what you were told divinity is in church.
Right.
And that's because divinity in church is, in the end, predefined notion of what divinity is rather than an exploration of what it is.
Yes. Because if you don't have the predefined notion, then you can't get people in seats.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, like, and I get that asking questions as, like, your main motive for doing things is probably not a very stable foundation. But if you use that as, like, a bouncing off point for developing who you are, then you end up with things like you learn that something is terribly unhealthy. Like, maybe you're... Okay, let's just go with my own experience, right? So one of the things about me is easily that I have never, ever, 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 ever been in a relationship in my life.
Right.
Because I was told, this is the ideal.
Yeah.
You have to do this.
This is the
And the oh man, whenever I heard you and Nate talking about that, complete sidetrack. Michael Gungor is super disenfranchised with the church. And,
yes,
but he has a really good book called This. And his mantra in the book is this and not that.
Yes.
So that, because it's a very Buddhist idea, but it's very much like, this is where you are. Desires bring pain. I don't entirely agree with that logic.
I don't agree with that either.
But having a this and not that mentality whenever you're trying to learn about things is super ultra helpful.
Or
because you can only make
yourself.
the steps you're doing.
Yeah, or just learn about yourself, or like find ways to grow yourself. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think kind of the image that pops up in my mind is like you use it as something to bounce off of. You know, being able to ask those questions. I imagine Mega Man jumping from wall to wall, trying to get through a level, and just continuously going up. Like, that is what it is. Like, you continue asking and reflecting until you get to where you need to go.
Yeah.
And then you keep moving forward.
And in the end, where you need to go is not an end.
Exactly, because you still have the rest of the level, and you still have the rest of the game.
Ah.
And then, you know, if you die, then, you know, maybe you get reincarnated. That's a whole other conversation.
I don't know. That's... Yeah.
I think
I don't know if that stuff's even worth, like...
Yeah. Well...
continuing down sometimes because of how mysterious and unknown it is.
Yeah, I actually kind of want to do a little bit more research into the idea of reincarnation because I think it's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
Like the idea that creation inherently is cyclical, I think we can observe, like where we're at now. But the idea that it's cyclical also in a personal, spiritual sense where our spirits are reincarnated in something else. Yeah. That idea I think is really cool. However, I think it was more applicable back before there were 7 billion people on the planet, and there continues to be more and more. I'm like, okay, where are these souls going at this point? Where we have too many?
If they're going under the ground, we're fucked. Because there's only so much room there now. We know.
Right.
If some of them are going up to the sky, man, they're having a rough life because that's a bigger area than we have.
Right. Right though.
Yeah, it's
it's interesting.
But yeah, I ended up a lot of the so if we go back the example here, like the it for me was like trying to find an ideal relationship. Mm-hmm. Well, that's because it's tied to like so many different things that I learned that it's a completely tangled up freaking mess in me, and then I go like, well, if I continue doing this, I'm going to be forever alone.
Right.
Like, because I mean, it, to some extent, like, I could talk to anybody that's married, and I could talk to anybody that I have a work relationship perfectly fine. But I cannot talk to any single person that I have any romantic interest with, because the second that happens, everything in me just... I don't know how to... Like, it just crashes and burns. Too much RAM used up, not enough was installed in this sub-process. We don't know how to deal with romantic stuff because we weren't taught how to do that. We were just taught that all of the older people in my church that were still married were the ideal. And man, that created some... And so, here, I can even go even further back.
All right, let's go.
Whenever I was in youth group, I had... I tried to date multiple people in the youth group. And,
yeah, that was me too.
And
did not go well.
I was taught by the older people in my church that how they met the person that they loved was to pursue them even though they didn't like them.
Ooh, yep.
That is terrible.
That is toxic. That is toxic nowadays.
That is terrible for both me and them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
well, because back then it was a game.
Yeah.
Now it's the swipe game. It's a totally different game, and they didn't realize that when they were telling you that. But like now we look back and we're like, yeah, no, that was them. That was the chase. That was literally part of romanticizing. That was part of dating.
Yeah.
Today the chase is you're needy. Get away from me.
Like, yeah. Well, it's you sitting there going like, you know what? Like out of the people that I knew in my church, only like 5 of them had happy marriages. The rest of them were divorced. Oh wait, maybe if all of them were following the same advice, it only had a certain percentage of a success rate. Like, statistically, it's not working out for everyone.
Right.
And so then we continue to do the same things, and therefore I have a so romanticized idea of even like asking somebody out on a date that it often destroys even my ability to ask somebody out on a date, right? So
because it has to be perfect.
Yeah, and so I sit there and I start going through scripture, and I'm like, all of these relationships are screwed.
All of them are so trash.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
They're all horrible.
Yeah.
Like, man, Jacob, like.
Oh my God! Yes.
Oh my gosh! There's just so much there. Whenever he goes to meet his brother again for the first time after he's married and everything, what does he do? There's something very specific.
He sends out Leah first.
Yeah, and he puts Rachel on Tyra all the way in the back, man.
Yeah, because he wants her to be protected.
She needs to be safe.
Down.
Oh my gosh! What? Like, even if you have 2 wives, that's a super...
Oh, no, it's awful. But you also, like, in that same vein, though, he was also pretty much tricked into marrying Leah.
Yeah, but at the same time...
He's still your wife.
Should have went outside the bounds of the current convention and been like, sorry, you need to stay here. You weren't the expected one.
Right.
But that's not how it worked.
Nope, because she was his property at that point.
Yep. And, that's so sad.
That's a whole other
So that's a very noticeable thing is that, like, so the one thing that they tried to do so hard in the Bible was to give you at least one story that didn't absolutely suck.
Which one was that?
Song of Solomon.
Maybe.
And it's these two people that have, like, actual, like, the hots for each other. And that wasn't normal.
And it's mostly written from a woman's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so, like,
So it's a woman's voice in the Bible, which is rare.
Which is rare.
And then you have this very sexualized tone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what did we do with it?
This is obviously about Jesus.
What the heck,
My favorite story McMurray tells is how when he was in, like, Sunday school as a kid, there was this one kid who was just sitting there and the teacher's, like, describing something and he's trying to get them to guess what it is. And the kid raises his hand and he's like, I know the answer is supposed to be Jesus, but this sounds like a squirrel. And squirrel was the right answer. Like, I feel like that's how we interpret the Bible sometimes. Like, I know this answer is supposed to be Jesus, but this sounds like sex. Like,
yeah,
that's Song of Solomon in a nutshell.
Like, so our Professor Straggy tried to rationalize it for me, and it was rough because he tried to explain, like, why would there be all of these monks that claim celibacy that are then reading this book? And he tried to be like, well, that means it must have some deeper meaning. And it's like, or that means that all of those monks have a sexuality.
Yeah, this was their romance novel.
And therefore they read this and they're like, oh man, there's like something in this book that speaks to the section of me that I have set away,
right?
But it still speaks to me enough because sexuality is such a piece of your being,
intricate part of who we are. Yeah,
so like I completely understand why their intent to rationalize it happens is because they're like, well, I really like it.
Well, actually, that's funny because that's actually in Shameless. Because I finally finished it, by the way. Woot. Yeah, I know. And she talks about Song of Solomon. She talks about how, at one point in the Jewish tradition, that's exactly what they did. They just completely spiritualized it and said, nope, this isn't about sex, this is about God. This is our interaction with God. Which is funny because she also brings up earlier in the book how when somebody describes a spiritual experience, it sounds a lot like sex. Like, often you could read it, and if you just put that twist on it, you're like, yeah, that fits.
If instead you use the word euphoria to explain both spiritual experiences and sexual experiences,
then yeah,
you could very quickly be like, oh wait, they both meet that category.
Oh, that matches. That makes sense. It's almost like sexuality is a natural part of being, or something. Anyway, but it's kind of it's contrasted with how the Jewish tradition and the priests took it and said, no, we're not going this way.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's reminiscent of how other Christians later on down the line who were male took out a female voice as well. And that's kind of one of her points is, it's written in a female's perspective.
Yeah.
One way to take that out, as well as the sex part, is say, nope, it's about God.
Yeah.
Because then the focus is completely off. Then all the monks, all the priests who can just sit and read it all they want without having to be sinful. It is what it is.
It is.
But I think it's that idea, that mentality that we can't have a sexual nature without a certain context that bothers me so much. And that's the reason I love the book, and I'm so happy you recommended it to me.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a very, very good book.
Yes, it was
for any perspective.
Oh,
that
yes,
you're coming
absolutely.
from.
Because it very much elaborates on the LGBT community. It very much elaborates on what a healthy marriage can be and what it isn't, obviously. Yeah. It hits on abortion. It hits on...
What did you think about her view on abortion?
So for anybody who hasn't read the book...
So it's Shameless by Nadia Boltz-Weber.
Yes, thank you for remembering her name, because I do not remember author names.
Boltz-Weber is like dashed.
Yeah, it's a hyphenated. But... her perspective is essentially life doesn't begin until there is breath, and I can't remember where she pulls that. I think it's from the Jewish tradition. I'm pretty sure.
She goes back a little bit in history to say like this idea
has been here for a long time.
It has been here for a long time that life began at breath.
Yes.
And that the new idea that life begins in the womb only started to exist, one, because science was able to state that there's something in the womb that's growing.
Right.
And then two, because they needed a political agenda.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because she kind of blends this pre-modern idea with a modern problem.
Yeah.
And creates a postmodern solution with it. It's very beautiful.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's really cool.
So her approach is, if life doesn't begin until breath, there is no taking of life through abortion.
Yeah.
I loved that twist. It was so clever.
Well, what she does is
so good.
She says so Genesis is much more reputable a source to take it from than to take that solemn verse.
The one psalm verse.
Poetry.
It's literally, arguably so Genesis.
That's arguable too. But how it is
how it's
perceived
oh yes, absolutely,
is meant to be like reality, whereas poetry in Psalms is more of meant to be poetry.
Yes, the poetry in Psalms is more like
reading
a book
if you took all of Genesis straight literally, you could probably still come up with an okay theology. If you were to take all of Psalms literally, I need to go dash some children's heads against rocks.
Yes, that's true. No, and you're
not that I'm going to do that. That's not...
Reading Psalms is more like reading a book of poems. reading Genesis is reading a person's poetic representation of how they see the beginning, of how they see reality forming.
Yeah.
And again, that idea of breath being the beginning, that's there. That's very obviously there. And it was very obviously put there because that was the mentality at the time anyway. So I thought it was a brilliant idea. I loved it.
Yeah.
Before I read it anyway, I was already pro. Like, I'm pro-choice.
Yeah.
I'm pro-choice, pro-life. In the sense that, like, I don't want somebody to have an abortion because not only is it mangling a part of them physically, I think it does it a lot emotionally.
Yeah.
And even she mentions, like, some of the struggles she had afterwards.
Yeah.
She doesn't regret it,
but
which I think is fascinating as well.
It did.
But there's this
take
thing.
Its toll.
Yeah, it obviously took its toll. So for me, that's one of the reasons I don't like abortion, because of the harm it does to the mother, and obviously there's this life that now can't be. But I'm also very pro-choice in the sense of if somebody feels that is their only option, I don't want to take that away from them.
Yeah.
So then hearing this idea that if we consider life beginning at the first breath, to me that takes away half of that problem I had.
Yeah.
With the pro-life mentality. Like, it just completely obliterates it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, the pro-life is completely relying on the being having a consciousness and a spirit in order to make a religious argument.
Right.
But that's not...
But that goes into a whole other conversation about what spirit is and everything else.
Yeah, that's so difficult.
Well, and it is and it isn't. I mean, for me, I just look at it and say, okay, well, that's part of your brain that develops. I don't think a child has a soul until a certain point. Like, I think a baby starts developing its soul, obviously, because it starts reacting to things.
Mm-hmm.
But until that point, like, the brain isn't developed enough for them to have anything. So for me, looking at that, I said, oh yeah, well that makes sense. That makes sense why. But then you also have, like, when babies will kick, when, like, you can tell a baby, like, a mom's like, oh, my baby's happy. Like, they get this connection that we as men obviously don't.
Yeah.
But they have this idea of what that personality is already.
Yeah.
So is that a soul? Is it not? That's, yeah, it's complicated, but I don't think in the argument that it matters.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
I think in the end, if you're taking it as, in the end, if you try to paint it a certain color, you're gonna mess up.
Yeah,
because it can't.
Absolutely.
It can't, because there's certain times that, like, would that emotional toll be worth?
Yeah,
doing it.
Yeah,
if you have the financial capabilities to take it, or if the orphanage system didn't suck ass, or if like all of those different things, right? Like, if all of those things were up and running, like, would the emotional toll be worth it? Maybe it's not. Maybe now that we're going to lower those rates or something. Yeah. But then there's also, like, a statistical problem with the number of people on this earth and environmental problems and stuff like that.
Where, all the minor details.
Yeah. Entire countries have, like, cut birth rates by, like, being like, you can't have more kids. And America's like, have as many kids as you want.
But not really.
Yeah.
But we won't help you with any of them.
No.
Because we don't like our welfare system to make people just completely reliant on it. Because that's always what happens with the welfare system.
I don't know what the correct solution for that stuff is.
I don't either. I just think both perspectives on it are dumb sometimes. Which brings us back, I think, oddly enough, to the church that gives a shit.
Yeah.
Or doesn't give a shit. Or however you want to phrase it.
A church that gives a shit.
A church that gives a shit. I say that doesn't give a shit because it's throwing off it's throwing off the yoke of the tradition.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. But also, I feel like if you were to do that, it would also reach back and grab a lot of the healthy parts of the Christian tradition.
Yeah.
And explore those in a way that's meaningful. Because I think you and I both appreciate some of the older Christian tradition.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate a lot of the Jewish midrash. Like, being able to sit and just talk about the Bible in a way that you can't do today because people will be like, wait, I thought this was absolute truth. I can't theorize about scripture. That doesn't work. But
what's the point of even having a book that you don't get to read?
that you don't get to explore.
You don't even get to read it, man. If you read it, that would mean that like you take the words and actually do something with them. You don't do anything with them in that tradition of like, oh, it's the pure holy word. Literally what you do is you pick up the words and then you go, cool, and then you put them back down. Because you're not going to use them for anything.
Well, why do you think they had to memorize scripture for so many... Like, why do you think that was a part of our tradition? Back, I mean, shit, even memorizing scripture happened... pre-printing press? Like, that was really the mentality, even. And then printing press developed, and then it's like, oh, be free from the yoke of Catholicism, in some extent.
Yeah.
And then, even then, it's like, nope, pastors still have the say on interpretation. You just have to memorize it so that you can read it in church when they read it out loud. There's, it wasn't really something that shaped you. It was something you had as a piece of your brain, not a piece of your heart.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion. Now, obviously, there were people who took it and they ran with it. I mean, geez, you have the evangelical movement. You have people who went out and I can't remember his name. Why can I not remember his name? Billy Graham. There we go.
Yeah.
Billy Graham, this like amazing man who built this entire ministry that was much bigger than he ever was as just a single person. It's phenomenal. And that is one of the few examples of not even a mega church pastor, but just like a person whose thing got so big and so expansive that I can still look at the man there and say, okay, he probably wasn't perfect. There were probably one or two things.
He was one of the very few people that didn't just
screw it up.
Yeah,
like he didn't. Like you look at any other big pastor, even Rob Bell. Yeah. You have this guy who had a mega church, and he starts saying things that are considered universalist, and I mean, he pretty much is at this point in a lot of respects.
Yeah,
I don't think he would claim that because I don't think he cares.
Well, I think universalism has some inherent negatives. Whenever you're like taking, like if you take universalism and then move out from there, that everything can lead you to God or everything can lead you to divinity. There are inherent problems in that. That's not true. In my opinion, I don't think everything can. I think there are actually problematic things in this world that can cause you harm. And so like I think that just taking purely universalist as like a thing, like I think there's things in the Christian tradition that can severely cause you harm,
absolutely.
And therefore I don't want to sit there and be like Christianity is universally part of this like big greater thing. No, it has pieces in it that cause severe harm, and that's the reason why I'm not willing to just be like everything can bring us to a divine presence. That's not I don't think that's true. I believe that there's a possibility that other religions are looking into the same things that I am.
Yes, I would agree.
And that's completely fair.
Yeah.
But if at any point any of these religions promote violence, then I think that we have then lost the ability to look at the divine in those regards, and like we're not actually doing it. Like,
I can see that.
So that's why I stray away from universalism, because I don't think certain things that are ultra
things that are harmful don't necessarily fall into the idea of pointing to God.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I could agree with that.
Whereas some things actually take that would be a part of it.
Yeah. I think this is going to be a kind of a bigger statement than I expected to make. I think hallucinogenics can point people towards God. I do. I genuinely do. I mean, so
no. If you, I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
You don't have to rationalize it to me. If you want a good reference for why I'm okay with you saying that, Comedy Sex God by Pete Holmes.
Yes, exactly.
Like, his first real thing after not being a Christian anymore was mushrooms.
Right.
I think that hallucinogenics do possibly have some after effects.
Oh, yes.
That maybe are not worth
Yes.
that path.
Not exploring too much, I would agree.
But, yeah. But at the same time, I understand what you're saying.
Well, and I wasn't going to justify it, actually, on that one. I'll leave that and people can say what they will. I think kind of the meme that I laugh at thinking about podcasts is Joe Rogan. Not because he's a meme himself, it's just the meme of, hey, have you tried DMT? With Joe Rogan specifically, because almost every single one of his podcasts, he brings up DMT. And it's this very concentrated hallucinogenic, and it's like a 15-minute trip. 15, sorry, didn't enunciate that well. And then you just come back. But it's like this very intense spiritual like journey is the only thing I've heard it described as. And it's this intense thing. And that reminds me of not necessarily acid, although I've heard acid has a similar effect. It's just much longer of an experience, which that's where it can be dangerous in my opinion.
Yeah.
But DMT, from what I've heard, it's just like this intense, you travel to some other place and then come back. And that, to me, that could be a very interesting spiritual awakening for people in a lot of ways. So for me, that's why I say like hallucinogenics, I think, have an aspect to them that can be very developmental.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you also, anything used poorly, that can be harmful.
Well, you have people that did so many drugs, you could tell that it has affected them in negative ways.
Absolutely.
So it's just, that's why I'm not willing to just say, yeah, sure.
That's fair. No, that's totally fair. And I mean, obviously, anything I'm saying as far as universalism, like opening yourself up to other religions, other paths of thought, Buddhism, hallucinogenics, anything like that, obviously take some consideration. Exploration isn't just chaos.
No.
Exploration is seeing where you want to step, taking the step, and then continuing to move forward with that mentality. Because if you're bouncing from one wall to the next and then you bounce into spikes, it won't work. You're going to die. You need to keep seeing where you're jumping to keep reflecting on yourself. But because I just wanted to use that analogy.
It's fair.
It worked.
Yeah.
It was okay.
He co-opted it.
I co-opted it. But the thing is, with the church that gives a shit, going back to that, everything we're saying is something you would not be afraid to hear your congregation.
Correct. If somebody in the congregation were to come up to me and be like, I heard these Muslim ideas, I think I want to be a Muslim.
Right.
I'll be like, cool. I'm glad that you found meaning, because, man...
Yeah.
Almost
that's what it's about.
A huge chunk of the people that I've met, they just can't manage to grasp anything, because the second they start grasping it, they're told no. It's...
Ooh.
And like, if that's not good for them, they'll figure it out.
Absolutely.
It's like, they'll figure it out faster than you constantly ruining every chance they have to figure something out. Mm. Like, if it's truly as bad as you say it is, then they'll taste it and go, no, this is very, very bitter. I should not go here.
I also like how recently you've been using that as a way to describe things. That doesn't taste good. I think that is the most appropriate reaction to something.
Well, taste has survival aspects to it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, the reason why something tastes really, really bad is because you're probably going to die. You shouldn't eat it.
You haven't told me that before. That is brilliant. Yeah, I love that idea.
You shouldn't eat it. It could be poisoned. That's like what your taste is supposed to partially do. If something tastes good, that's supposed to be an indicator that you're like okay to eat this. Like it's your base instinct to say, should I like be okay if I do this? And so like taste good and taste bad is a
sorry, I know I'm just
depiction.
I'm acting goofy right now because you said that, and I'm just like leaning back like, oh my gosh, because I'm sitting here thinking of the fact that you use like toxic or poisonous. I'm like,
yeah,
church. Instantly my brain goes to church, past relationships, things that like I look back on and I remember just this bad taste, and like the idea of pairing that with survival mentality, that is, I do genuinely enjoy that idea. Whew, that is cool. But yeah, no, I think you're right. If somebody finds something that doesn't taste good, they should have the ability to try other things on the menu.
Yeah. And if they come... And the thing that they lack in most of those regards is that in order to go taste new things, they had to leave all of their leadership and mentors behind. Mm-hmm. That means they have no guidance in directing them what they should do at this point. And
they're in the desert trying to figure out what's consumable and what's not.
Yeah, and that's just terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, like, the idea of a church that gives a shit is to say, hey, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial.
Absolutely.
And so why don't you? That's a Bible verse. So
yes, it is. You're right. That's one of my favorite scriptures, actually.
Yeah, and so like the intent is to say, wherever you decide to go here, you can try it out. You can figure it out. If you want to travel down this road of a bunch of different questions about how you relate to everything around you, that is okay. I am completely up for that.
Right.
What I'm not okay with is to watch you continue destroying yourself in self-destructive habits because you can't let go of things that are obviously harmful to you and aren't willing to go and figure out something else that would work better for you. And so that's where I think the church very much has that mentality because, like, let's something that's really, really simple that is very applicable. So I was told that I needed to have a conversion experience.
Oh,
right?
Yes. Okay.
So I had been in church since freshman year, and I would not say that I actually felt any love from it until my senior year.
Of high school, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Of high school. And so then, so I was in a church for freshman year probably isn't fair. It was probably more like sophomore year. It was pretty late. I didn't know a lot about Christianity at all. And so I was, the second I showed up, they were like, you're a tech guy, you obviously have to do sound. And I was like, cool, I like doing sound. And so I immediately got involved in that, but I didn't believe the things I was saying. It made me feel good. Yeah. But,
oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it made me feel really good. And whenever all of a sudden it started going really, really bad, I was getting ready to leave. Mm-hmm. And then, and everybody continued to tell me that I would have this conversion experience. I would feel the moment that it all clicked. Mm-hmm. Well, I still have never had a conversion experience. What I had was I read Francis Chan's book, Crazy Love, at the same time as an old sound guy came back to become the youth leader of my church. Mm-hmm. And he took me on drives to talk about ideas and stuff, and then told me that I'm an ass. Mm-hmm. And that I'm just not. He just straight up told me that when he's dropping me off, and I was like, oh, and I just burst out into tears because nobody had been telling me that I've been a terrible person to many of the people around me. And then, like, I just slowly started to develop like a normal human being does to grow. And there was never a click moment that all of a sudden I was good.
Right.
But I think most people, whenever they look at me, they'd be like, he's an upstanding person.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, the conversion experience only happens for a rare number of people, probably more people that are into drugs than not, because they understand what a moment is supposed to feel like. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, I just had like this month. And then I was completely sold on scripture, reading, growing myself. Luckily, the main thing that my pastor, my youth pastor, who was a charismatic Catholic that started going to whatever, he was a very young kid, right. And then he ended up in all these other Protestant churches later on, to where, like, all that he knew was to ask questions, basically. And so he taught us how to ask questions. And even though both him and I were very conservative whenever I went to college, as I was going to college, every time I'd come back, we'd be at the exact same spot. Because in the end, we learned the same method of asking questions to help grow ourselves. Mm-hmm. And if there was something negative that we discovered in ourselves, we would share it, and therefore we'd be like, oh wait, yeah, I kind of see that in myself too. Maybe I should, like, also go down that road. Right. And so just that one thing, like just having questions asked means you expound out of that. You get out of it. So,
no, you're absolutely right, and I think that's something that is missing, because in a lot of churches there's not room for genuine self-reflection, and that goes back to what we were talking about before we started recording. A documentary, Kumare. I definitely recommend watching it. At first it's funny, and then it gets actually kind of deep, in the sense of there's this guy who grew up in a Hindu family, watched his grandmother do her morning prayers, and always was like, well, what is this about? Went to school, studied it, kind of became more distant from it, like most of our friends with studying religion, and then says, I went and I traveled and I tried to find other gurus and other people who had this way of living that was supposed to be right, and a lot of them are frauds. And it's funny because he just gives like little glimpses of interviews with other gurus, and it's very obvious. It's so obvious how trash it is. And I was like, man, that's so toxic. Has a bad taste,
Yeah.
And then he says, well, what would it take for me to be a guru? And so he does. He literally starts this giant pranked or like punked thing where he grows out a beard, grows out his hair, puts on robes, and pretends to be a guru. He like practices in India and like gets his form down. I'll say form. And then he comes back to the U.S., travels to Arizona with some friends, starts teaching, and starts being a guru. And at one point, and I didn't tell you this, but at one point, he's like, I just wanted to see how far I could go with it. And so he gets one of these guys who's learning from him, and he's drawing a shape on the guy's head, as like a prayer. So it's a penis. He draws a penis on this guy's head for prayer, and then has him pray to a picture of Obama, Gandhi, and Osama bin Laden. It was literally the funniest thing I have ever seen. He also goes to this guy, slight spoiler, but it was hilarious in the documentary, called a acoustic theologian.
Okay.
That in the beginning there was the Word. The Word was the first sound of the universe in creation, and it's the sound that holds us all together. And then he gets a didgeridoo and starts has the director, the guru guy, he's laying down and he's playing a didgeridoo over him. He's like does all these sounds, he like hums, he's does all this weird stuff because that's what's connecting him to the universe. And it's literally, I had to pause it because another book I was reading that's complete fiction, makes fun of religion by creating a tonist cult who believes that like them getting in sync with a tuning fork helps them connect to the universe, and how there's different sects of this toning cult that's like some are F sharp, but they're really just heretics. The G's are where like it's so that's funny.
Really good.
And so when I saw this pop on the doc, I had to pause it. I had to bust up laughing because I was like, this isn't real. There's not real people like this. Obviously he is. But then the guru, going back to the actual point of the documentary, he kind of goes to these different people. He sees how far he can take it, and then he goes and visits this one guy who like has a ranch and has people living there, and they're both mostly just young millennial people who don't know what the hell they're doing. And he's just like, yeah, I'm giving these people a path, but I'm the only one who can give them truth. And then you see this interview with some of the people there, and they're like, yeah, no, we need him.
Yeah.
And the director's like, yeah, this reminded me of why I started doing this project. Not just to troll people, but that there has to be something better. And so he starts developing an idea. He calls it like the blue light meditation. And at first it's kind of a joke, but then he's like, then I started to actually buy into my own gimmick I was selling. That this blue light, this inner self that you can get in touch with can help you grow as a person. Going back to the point about reflecting.
Yeah.
And he just develops this idea and actually makes it his core teaching as a guru while he's still doing this facade. And he even starts telling his disciples, like, I am a fraud. I am a sham. I am not a real guru. Like, he says it, and obviously in the moment it sounds like he's just saying it as part of his teaching, because his teaching becomes, you are your own guru. Finally, it gets to the point of he's like, okay, well, I'm leaving you now. He gives like a final teaching, and about 47 days later, he gets them all together, and he comes out as himself. And actually, a majority of the people clap and cheer and are still thankful for the fact that he taught them how to look at themselves, how to think, and how to reflect in a way that helped them grow as people. That is what we're missing in the church. That is what we're missing in a lot of areas of religion in general, is because we're so focused on what is right.
Yep.
What is this document saying that I need to do? What is this leader saying that I need to do? Much like some of these cults or some of these other gurus who are these like false idealists, we get so focused on what the right path is, we lose track of finding our own.
Yeah. Well, you have to give some slack to people that are following that, out of the aspect of like, dude, if heaven or hell are real, then 100% gotta be in a religion.
Maybe.
Yeah. If they are real.
It depends on how restrictive you think those ideas are.
No, it's like if they're as real as the common Christian teaching teaches.
Okay. Yes.
Then you have to be there, and if you earnestly believe that everybody who's not doing the correct thing and are in the in crowd are going to burn forever, that's a big deal. But once you start like reflecting and getting more of yourself, you quickly realize that like these pictures of life, of afterlife that people are saying, are like just pictures of life itself anyway. So like I don't understand why this becomes the end of my life and not the current parts of my life, and you end up with as a result not a, like, you lose that that scarcity of grace that exists in religion, and that's why it has to be shared, and you gain being free, like everybody there encountered. Like the reason why he would help them is because he did not sit there and be like, you gotta do all these things. He gave them a bunch of ridiculous shit.
At first, yes. At first he did.
Yeah.
But then it did, because like even most of, and I'm giving him probably more credit than he needs, but he, it ends up him actually becoming a guru in the end.
Gotcha.
To make them become gurus. Like he ends up buying into his own shtick completely, because he's like, I can't just leave these people with what these guys would leave them with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of beautiful in that sense, where you see he gets changed as well, which I thought that was cool. But I think in the religious sense, you're right. It's hard to take the common Christian understanding, or any religious understanding, of a negative afterlife, or a bad afterlife, being the effect of something we do in our life.
Yeah.
To me, I look at that and I say, well, why not just focus on the life we're living and be better there? Like, that's my priority. I realize there's other parts there, but that's also because if it is real, which I'm skeptical on to begin with, if heaven and hell are real, I think God might be gracious enough that, since God knows that I want a connection with God. Yeah. Like, kind of pulling from the shack a little bit. This idea that those who want to be with me will. Those who do not, I will give them their freedom.
Are you talking about the movie or the book?
The book.
Oh,
The book, The Shack.
Sorry.
It was, I actually really enjoyed it, mostly because it was my first encounter with them creating not only God as a woman, but a sassy black woman, which was amazing. I loved it. The imagery was perfect, and then I developed a lot of theology from that book, actually, which probably shouldn't have, but it has opened up a lot. Well, it did open up a lot at that point. But I see it, and we have a friend, Booth, who gave me this idea that I did not expect from him at all. It was, hey, what if hell is not endless torture? What if hell is the place where the imperfect go to be purified and then move towards heaven.
That's a very oh, what was it? I've heard this idea. I can't think of where it came from now. It slipped.
I wouldn't know. All I told him is I was like, that sounds like just how I would view purgatory in general.
It's a church in Kansas City called IHOP. They have a view on Revelations that everybody who is in heaven, in the good side, are just priests and helpers for the people who are continuing to be purified in that second world.
In that scenario,
and so in like the book of Revelations, there's like this end bit, and like it sort of just ends up being like all these people are just trying to make all the other people like be happier, to grow as people. And so like in the end, like the book of Revelations just sounds like man, isn't it great that we don't have war anymore? Let's all be better, and that's what makes it sound less real.
Yeah.
But
no, it's true though.
But yeah, that's where I heard that idea from though.
So I kind of and I shared back with him kind of my idea on it is I think, and again kind of pulling from the Shaq's mentality of what heaven and hell are and kind of mixing that with a annihilationist idea of hell, which is like if you go to hell, you just cease to exist. Like that is really what hell is. Because in blending, the idea is if you want to be with God, you want to share and experience life continuously.
Yeah.
Because my idea of life is that there is no life without God.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's a pretty basic premise because, I mean, there's no creation without God. There's no life without God. Really simple. So if you don't want God, then God's going to give that choice to you, and He's going to say, okay, you do not have to live anymore. Continue. Like your soul, your spirit, every part of you just stops. Again, assuming there is an afterlife. That is the mentality I appreciate most. And instead of there being a like torturous hell where we, are refined through some sort of penance or whatever that may be, it's more like a purgatory where we're just there until we figure our shit out and we're like, yeah, okay, let's move forward. And then you get to be up in heaven where everything's good, perfect, and pretty, and whatever it is.
Yeah. It's a little bit off topic-ish. Did I tell you the pitch that I heard for reincarnation being real?
No, you did not. What pitch have you heard?
Do you believe in the law of conservation of mass?
Yes. Okay, explain this to me a little. I think you may have told me this, but I want to.
So the thing is that the law of conservation of mass states that, like, let's say that I die, you burn me in the ground. In the end, like, all the energy that I consume is matter still. It's still energy out there in the world. It's still going to be recycled. In the end, all energy, all mass, like, that's all recycled. Why in the world would your soul and spirit be any different than your body? Granted, I take up a little bit of a view where your spirit and soul and body are all sort of mixed up anyway, so that makes it even more pliable. But that was the first real pitch. That even if the reason why, like, reincarnation as, like, other ideas don't really start to go with me as well is because there's sort of like you get placed in different places in reincarnation according to what you did.
Right. Which sounds a lot more like heaven and hell than...
But if reincarnation is really just the law of conservation of mass, and whenever you die, your being is absorbed into the next being that comes into existence. Like, that makes a lot more sense.
Well, it actually reminds me of a Robin Williams movie. I need to remember what the name is, or the title of it is. But it's about Robin Williams' character dying and being in heaven. And, throughout the story, a lot of stuff happens. He ends up rescuing his wife from purgatory. It gets dark, but then it...
Gotcha.
Real dark. Like, it's sad. but it's a beautiful fucking movie. And in the end, they're together, and they're just kind of chilling in heaven, and they just kind of look at each other, and they're like, "You want to go around again?" And then you get this image of like the scene of this little boy and this little girl meeting on the dock of some city, and it's them.
Yeah.
And they're meeting each other again in this like reincarnated idea. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like it's so beautiful of an idea.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And I think that's kind of similar to the idea you're saying, except it also incorporates all multiple different religious perspectives. And I think that's cool. And I think that is more of a universalist approach.
Yeah.
Saying all of these are pointing to a similar reality.
Yes.
Again, like you said, give some credence where it's due and, criticism where it's necessary.
Yeah.
But I think that would be a really cool idea of how the afterlife works.
No, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, maybe that's why we're getting so many people nowadays, is so that they get a chance to experience the new technology instead of just, still having to clean up horse crap to get around everywhere.
Yeah, definitely the law of the conservation of mass idea falls away a little bit whenever you only had 2 million people to start with.
Yes.
But then, at the same time, we consumed other life in order to continue creating that. So you could end up taking more of a view of like even trees matter.
Even trees, that's true. That's true. All right.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. This has been a interesting conversation about a church that gives a shit and what that could mean. Well, no, I think it still stays true to the idea.
Yeah.
I think what we've been talking around, is still what I hope the church that gives a shit is.
Mm-hmm.
Not just with you, I'm saying in general. Like, whoever can do that idea. Because I do have hope for religion having a significant reality. I do have hope for personal growth in the zeitgeist of our culture. Like that developing more.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's very much... Yeah, that's very much everything we've discussed. And, I mean, realistically, probably what I'm just going to keep talking about mostly on the podcast. Because it's where I'm at. Because I'm growing so much from where I was.
Yeah. No, that's completely fair.
And I'm absolutely loving it. And I want other people to love it. And that being said, I hope you enjoyed your chocolate milk with us. And catch you next time.
Peace.